December 16th, 2007, New Line and MGM announced that Peter Jackson, director of my absolute favorite trio of movies in The Lord of the Rings, would be executive producer of The Hobbit movie and its sequel. Awe and excitement coursed through me as I thought to myself, this is it! A new Lord of the Rings movie! It's gonna be great. Oh, how wrong I was.
You just have this understanding going in that unless you get this right, you're actually jeopardizing the movie.
The Hobbit movies, despite having a similar team of creatives that helped make the Lord of the Rings films, sucked. All three of them. They were bland, bloated, full of uninteresting, unlikable characters, and most offensive of all, they had the gall to pretend to be something they weren't. A Lord of the Rings film. It would recycle great things about that trilogy, but apply them in ways that felt like a mockery of what came before, and then iterate on them in the most brain-dead, uncompelling manner possible. And I could not believe it. How do you get the same director, the same screenwriters, the same composer, production team? How do you get all of the pieces that made something so great, and then make something so bad? Enter Yooka-Laylee, a spiritual successor to fan favorite Banjo-Kazooie and one of the most aggressively mediocre games I've ever played. Remember back in the day when Rare teased a sequel to their most beloved franchise for a new generation of hardware? Remember how excited you were? I remember how excited I was. But then, well, you know. And long story short, Rare eventually collapsed and became the wasteland you see today. And the creative cogs that made up that machine were separated and lost to time. At least until 2015, when a large percentage of creatives from Rare's golden era got back together to create their own company in Playtonic Games, and crowdfund what they claimed would be a true modernization of the classic collectathon Banjo-Kazooie. That's right, Banjo-Kazooie. No nuts, no bolts. Just 3D platforming and a metric ton of collectibles. What could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong?
One amazingly successful, record-shattering Kickstarter campaign later, here we are in 2017 with the finished product. A true sequel to the Banjo games. A modernized rendition of a genre we all look back so fondly on. A 3D platformer collectathon that injects creative new life into the genre while avoiding the technical pitfalls of the past.
Were it so easy.
In case it's not immediately apparent, Yooka-Laylee was funded purely on the idea that we'd be getting a true sequel to Banjo-Kazooie. Not Grunty's Revenge, not Nuts and Bolts, but a true Banjo 3. Just in a different world with a different cast of characters. And of course, with all the technical polish we'd expect from a game of the modern era. Now, full discretion here. For the first few hours playing this game, I had impossibly high expectations. And with that sort of mindset going into it, there was probably zero chance of me being satisfied. Although I knew it wouldn't top Banjo-Kazooie, I mean it is my favorite game of all time, I was at the very least expecting it to be a really solid 3D platformer. Now, here's the thing. If they'd simply sold this game's Kickstarter as a game that looks and plays somewhat similarly to Banjo-Kazooie, they might have gotten away with it. But when they're going to go ahead and try and sell a group of people on the idea that they're not going to make the same mistakes as before and they're going to modernize the 3D platformer and yet don't really follow through on that at all, you can't really expect people to not be kind of upset. I love the people at Playtonic. I backed this game day one, but the last thing I'm going to do is wave off a mediocre game as passable when I know their team is capable of so much more. Looking back at developer interviews, I'm still kind of trying to figure out how they went about modernizing the genre. Giving you the option to make small worlds bigger. Okay, but at the expense of limiting your worlds to 5 compared to Banjo-Kazooie's 9?
Playtonics. So these are unlockable gameplay modifiers where the players can fine-tune the gameplay. So yeah, it's all about empowering the players.
Getting to unlock and use what are essentially just cheats. If anything, a modernization of that feature would be charging microtransactions, so you didn't really modernize anything, but at least thank you for not making us pay you more money?
We've also improved in certain areas where we thought things could be enhanced and improved and made kind of more up to date.
Enhanced and improved and more kind of up to date. Okay, like with what exactly? The camera? One of the primary motivations for making this video was that I've been noticing a lot of critics suggesting the idea that if you enjoyed Banjo-Kazooie, you will definitely enjoy this. And as someone whose favorite game is, again, Banjo-Kazooie, that statement makes me irrationally upset. Just because something employs the same sort of fundamentals of a good game, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be of a similar quality. What annoys me so much is that people arguing that this is basically Banjo 3 and therefore you'll like it if you enjoyed Banjo-Kazooie are basically suggesting either that this is a good game or that Kazooie really isn't. And so in a desperate attempt to discover what made Banjo-Kazooie so fun and Yooka-Laylee so not, I played both to completion, Yooka for the first time and Banjo for, I don't know, probably the 50th. Banjo-Kazooie is a Rareware game that was made for the Nintendo 64 and released in 1998. And the thing is, sometimes everything just comes together to create a perfect storm. Sometimes there's an unparalleled level of inspiration and motivation that goes into the development of a game that results in something that would eventually and inevitably become a classic. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the development of Banjo-Kazooie. Super Mario 64. The reason Banjo-Kazooie is what it is, and the reason Yooka-Laylee isn't. Super Mario 64 was Nintendo's answer to 3D. It changed the game completely, and to this day is a surprisingly solid experience. Rareware, working at the time as a second-party developer for Nintendo, was tasked with creating incredible new experiences for the new hardware, and for the most part, they delivered in spades. But this 3D platformer, this Mario 64, Rare wanted to make something that was even better than Mario, and so they put their all into it. They had the blueprint all laid out, and all they had to do was inject their own unique sense of charm and creativity into what would become one of the most beloved of its genre. Yooka-Laylee didn't have any direct competition. Its entire existence is a result of the exact opposite and complete and utter lack of competition. Playtonic Games saw that nobody was making this genre of game, so they figured they'd jump at the chance. And jump they did. About as successfully as an inebriated Conquer the Squirrel. Case in point, the title theme. Let me be clear, it's not that this song is bad. I don't think I could ever call a single Grant Kirkhope track bad. I mean, the man is a master of his craft. It's just, it perfectly encapsulates what this game is attempting to do and how successfully it does it. That is to say, not at all. It makes me feel so bad for the developers because it's like trying to capture lightning in a bottle for a second time, and without every single member that helped make that a reality the first time, no less. But it's, wow. It's still catchy, Kirkhope knows how to make a good melody, but it feels so soft, timid, uncomfortable in its own skin. Wait, did I just describe myself? Especially in comparison to Banjo's bouncy, bombastic opening tune, the fun factor is sorely missing. Let's compare the two. Listen to this. Listen to how fun literally every instrument is.
It's all going to be instruments. Banjo, piccolo, all of those. You're like, yes, yes, I'll just do it right now.
Every single piece leads you to just grinning from ear to ear. And as it ends, you are more than ready to jump in and collect every single pointless little thing the game has to offer. Because you know it'll be fun. And now, Yooka. It feels almost melancholy. Like there's this weird lingering sense of sadness that evokes the sensation of, well, we tried. I mean, I wish we'd had more time to work on the game, but we tried. So in that regard, I guess this is actually the perfect title theme. But by the end of it, you're really feeling like, man, do I really want to play this? I mean, I've still got Breath of the Wild and Persona and yeah, that's probably not how the game should make you feel leading into it. Skipping past the very banjo-centric title screen, we get a very banjo-centric file select screen, which I enjoy. But is there an animation for when you select a file?
Weak.
Now, this sort of thing is interesting. In this modern age, the ability to patch games allows Playtonic to do things like fix something as severe as their horrible camera issues or add something as quote-unquote unimportant as pause menu music. They may even eventually patch in a file select animation. And while I like that they're able to do that, at the same time, it kind of gives them a reason to just push the game out and fix it later. That's a problem. I've been noticing lately that a lot of games post-launch seem to get a barrage of quality of life patches in the standard release of DLC, to the point where it almost feels like it's punishing the consumer who wants to dive right in. Instead of releasing a game that works 100% from the get-go, developers know that they can just add in what's missing or what's broken later. And for someone like me who typically wants to play a game the moment it's released, that kind of sucks. And so at some point, this video could be rendered entirely null and void. And I kind of hope that's the case. If Playtonic does eventually figure out how to make Yooka-Laylee a game that overcomes its own shortcomings, that'll be great. But I still can't see it ever really being anything more than just mediocre. Banjo-Kazooie was never praised for its story, but it's not something I would ever call mediocre. The setup is simple. Ugly evil witch steals main character's cute little sister to help transform herself into something uncomfortably attractive and effective. You want to save your cute little sister because she's cute and your sister, and saving her means getting to explore these worlds for the sheer sake of fun. Throughout the entire game, the main antagonist, the aforementioned ugly witch Gruntilda, is taunting and mocking you, all the while in rhyme, making her insults all the more annoying. But annoying in a good way. This is a great motivational tool in wanting to take her down, as well as a means of making an otherwise reasonably forgettable character design memorable regardless. What I'm saying is, Grunty is great. The plot of Yooka-Laylee essentially boils down to the main antagonist wanting to steal all of the books in the world because... reasons? I've played nearly 20 hours of this game and I'm still not sure what the point of Capital B's mission was. Something to do with rewriting the universe? I don't know, but it isn't nearly as effective as wanting to save your sister, or even bringing bottles back to life, and that is saying something. And then we have Capital B himself, the game's villain, an anthropomorphic business bee that looks like the love child of Despicable Me's Gru, and a minion. Gross. Throughout the game, Capital B taunts the player just as Grunty once did, but it feels cheap, recycled, a shadow of its former self. Something this game suffers from probably more than anything else. The game does have some genuinely funny moments, typically any of the interaction between the pages. And Capital B with his questionably designed duck partner, Dr. Quack. And of course, there's that standard rare class of innuendo. Aside from that though, the game's dialogue falls flat almost every single time. Its characters are constantly talking and constantly breaking the fourth wall in the most obnoxious way possible. It's too much, and the writers clearly had no idea when to stop. And if you're going to make your characters constantly talk like you're going to have to, at the very least, make your characters nice to look at. Does this game succeed at that? Yooka-Laylee overall just doesn't look that great. And even though it is a Kickstarter game, you can't really use that as an excuse when backed projects like Shovel Knight and Shantae Half Genie Hero exist, especially given the pedigree of the Playtonic staff. These guys used to make top tier stuff back in the day. I'd argue that the fur on Fox and Conquer are still some incredible looking graphical touches even by today's standards. Although maybe I'm just a sucker for that kind of thing. And so, seeing what they managed with Yooka-Laylee, it's pretty obvious they were rushed to get this game out the door. Which is hilarious, considering I'm pretty sure one of the major selling points they listed of starting their own company was that they wouldn't have to feel pressured to get a game released ASAP anymore. And look what happened. Here we are. Pepperoni explosions.
At the end of the day, even if it's not perfect, it's better than nothing.
But look, at the end of the day, story really isn't that big a deal with these games. What's important is how these games play and how much fun they manage to be. So how much fun is Yooka-Laylee? Banjo and Yooka play mostly the same. Both can attack, jump, flutter jump, high jump, fly, shoot projectiles, etc. And they both control reasonably well, but there are a few key differences that really make one stand out from the other. Banjo has moves that take advantage of Kazooie with abilities like temporary speed boosts, dive bombing, etc. Nothing particularly groundbreaking, but fun enough. Yooka's move pool is a bit more diverse, with the ability to create a sonar explosion, a bubble that allows them to bypass swimming controls, and the most unique set of moves, Slurp Shot and Slurp State, which gives Yooka the power of whatever element he's able to lick up, including fire, water, ice, and grenades, the most destructive natural element of them all. What's interesting about this is that you'd automatically assume that because of Yooka's more diverse palette of attacks, it'd be the more fun of the two. But while these concepts are cool enough, I never felt that their execution was all that solid. They just felt like temporary upgrades to perform some sort of menial task, like getting across a windy bridge or lighting up a dark room, or helping a sentient cloud empty his bladder. Gross. A few of the moves even just flat out break various sections of the game, serving instead to invalidate the point of certain things like swimming or just straight up platforming. But if I'm being honest, and considering I'm not a huge fan of the swimming or platforming in this game anyway, having the option to bubble my way through an underwater segment or fly across a series of platforms never really bothered me all that much, even though that does present another problem entirely. And then there's each game's method of retrieving these special moves. In Banjo-Kazooie, you have to search for each world's specific set of moves. They were essentially another form of collectible, and it felt all the more rewarding when you'd eventually discover them. Yooka-Laylee straight up gives them to you right off the bat. Just keep walking forward from the entrance and boom, talk to the trouser snake and he'll sell you everything from that world all at once. While that might be a relief for some, for a collectathon fan like myself, this is lazy and misses the point entirely. My biggest problem with the moves in Yooka-Laylee was the power bar. Basically, every time you use a special move like Camo Cloak or Sonar Shot, you drain this ugly little meter here which recharges incredibly slowly. Now, I get it. The game developers have to limit how often the player can fly around the world. That's totally fine. My only real complaint with the power bar is how it's tied to this game's version of the Talon Trot, the reptile roll. Even if this move is a bit slippery to control, it's still the fastest and most fun method of travel, so being limited to how often you can use it is kind of dumb. And in the demo, there was no power bar, which was a good thing. Let me use this move when I want. Having to manage the power bar whenever I wanted to use the reptile roll to get around was frustrating and led to me using only one tonic the majority of the game, the one that let me waste less power during my roll. So basically, your nifty little game modernization feature was relegated solely to helping me keep a bar from depleting faster during a very specific action. That's not fun. Aside from the Talon Trot being infinitely better than the reptile roll by merit of its simply not having a power meter, something Banjo nails that Yooka absolutely fails is the satisfactory sense of impact. There's something so weirdly gratifying about using the rat-a-tat rap on one of those giant eel monsters, for example. The sound effects really give it a feeling of tearing through flesh, and its roar of agony followed by slithering out of that hole down to its death is just, that's good. But when you hit anything in Yooka-Laylee, there's no sense of impact. It feels mushy and weak, and in some cases like you're not getting anywhere. Ah yes, the World 2 boss. Such elegant design. Every single boss in this game ranges from either not great to plain terrible, with the World 3 Kraken boss being the exception to this rule. A lot of these bosses just kind of feel like afterthoughts, as do features like the transformations and the Cardos minigames, all of which were, unsurprisingly, stretch goals for the Kickstarter campaign. In Banjo-Kazooie, there aren't really any bosses, at least not in a traditional sense. Sure, you fight enemies like a giant hermit crab and conga, but you're able to make short work of them all, which feels great. None of them overstay their welcome, and none of them are frustrating. And we go back again to Yooka. Just let me remind you, this game was sold as a spiritual sequel to Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo-Kazooie didn't have any of these annoying fights like the inflatable circus dinosaur or that terrible anglerfish boss from Banjo-Tooie. And yet, they repeat history with Tooie instead of sticking to what worked so well for Kazooie. Okay, so the bosses are awful. Whatever. What about the transformations? Banjo-Kazooie had those adorable little, the alligator guy with the little backpack on him and the shorts, and there was the little pumpkin. What kind of adorable transformations does Yooka-Laylee have? All of the transformations, every single one of them, are gross and control like garbage. I guess the school of piranha control the best, but just let that sink in. You transform into a school of piranha. But no transformation controls worse than the snowplow. Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I really wish someone would make a game where you drive a big snowplow that can't turn unless it's moving, and when it does turn, it's really janky, and you gain momentum way too fast, and to top it all off, forces you to make precision platforming while driving around a level consisting entirely of ice physics. No, you haven't. Because that would be clinically insane. Speaking of controlling like garbage, the Cardos Minecart minigame. Despite the awkward slowdown and overly sensitive speed up mechanics, along with that awful cooldown on the cannon and the fact that it's absurdly difficult to hit anything, as a result of the track almost always looping around, I didn't mind them nearly as much as everyone else seems to. I may not be anywhere near the biggest fan of this game, but slap a David Wise track on literally anything and I will gladly play it. Most of the time.
No, fuck!
Okay, so Yooka-Laylee has its fair share of problems. As long as they put in some colorful, memorable worlds like Treasure Trove Cove or Clicklock Wood, and some interesting characters and some exciting challenges, I'm sure that they could. They failed. They had some cool design ideas, some of the background art looks great, but ultimately, they failed. Not only do they limit the roster to 5 compared to Kazooie's 9, they choose instead to innovate on the idea of levels by letting you expand them, which for the most part just makes an already uninteresting environment only slightly less uninteresting. And for better or worse, bigger. Ivory Towers, the hub world, looks uninteresting and its layout is unmemorable and confusing and everything is ugly and yeah. It's not great. Tribal Stack Tropics is generic and full of characters that look like they belong in an episode of the early to mid-2000s Nickelodeon cartoon Jimmy Neutron. Expanding the world lets you meet Shovel Knight. Glitter Glaze Glacier is a giant ice desert. Glitter Glaze Glacier is a giant ice desert. Moody Maze Marsh is ugly, but in an aesthetically appropriate sort of way, so it gets points from me. Capital Casino is a giant casino, which means you'll be doing a lot of... Galleon Galaxy looks nice, and yet I hate pretty much everything else about it. The level design, the challenges... the transformation, the music though. The music in this game is insanely good, like inappropriately good. Like, this game's soundtrack has no right being this good. This game doesn't deserve it. So if this game has given us anything of value, it's 10,000% the soundtrack. The musical highlight for me would absolutely have to be Glitter Glaze Glacier. It's like this magical, whimsical mix of Harry Potter meets Back to the Future of all things, and I love it. To be honest, Grant was at his best here when he wasn't trying to evoke the feeling of classic Banjo, strangely enough. Unfortunately, that results in a game where the only real hummable tune is the most Banjo-esque, that being the World 1 theme and Ivory Towers, and they're not that great. When you have a game where literally every song is catchy and memorable like Kazooie, Yooka-Laylee just pales in comparison. David Wise is though, of course, David Wise. Listen to a snippet of this and tell me it doesn't sound straight out of Tropical Freeze. Steve Burke, while not the most recognizable name, does some solid work for the Rextro arcade challenges. Most of these minigames are pretty inoffensive, I found myself enjoying a few, but there's one thing about it that I found especially obnoxious. You have to play the game twice at the very least, once to complete it and once to beat the high score. What annoys me is that even if you beat the high score in your first attempt, you still have to do it all over again. No! After a bad final boss fight and an equally bad animation of Capital B and Dr. Quack being blasted into a magic book, we get the credits, where we get to see all of our favorite side characters together at last.
I know that to love another, I must watch the world move past him. But such short years make an eternity worth living.
Oh, no. Of all the people in the world that I don't like, I'm in a room full of them.
But you know what? In spite of the many criticisms I have for this game, and even considering how disappointed it made me as I was writing the script, I can't hate it. It's certainly no Mighty No. 9. It's not a terrible game, it's just incredibly mediocre. And I feel that the people at Playtonic really wanted to make something special, and something just happened. I don't know if they had to get the game rushed out the door ASAP or whatever, but it just didn't turn out great. And even though I feel it failed, I'm kind of weirdly glad that it exists. Not because I ever want to go back to it, God no, but because it reminds me how truly, sincerely good a game Banjo-Kazooie was, and how there are so many others like myself who really loved it. And even if we never see another 3D platformer collectathon as memorable as Banjo-Kazooie, even if the genre itself were to die here with Yooka-Laylee's failed attempt at bringing it back, at least we know we'll always have the Baron Bird we know and love. Thanks for watching. Oh, you didn't think I'd forgotten about the Yooka-Laylee rap, did you?
Hey man, are you ready for this?
Yeah, I was ready 20 years ago!
It's terrible. Hey, thank you for supporting me. That's all I really wanted to say. I'm sorry if my impressions of Yooka-Laylee were pretty harsh, but if you enjoyed it, that's totally fine, and I am genuinely happy for you. Although after this, it may be pretty hard to believe, I do love the staff at Playtonic, and I wish them all the success in the world. This game just wasn't my jam, and that's okay. But hey, let me know in the comments whether you liked or disliked Yooka-Laylee, and whatever else you'd like to talk about. I'm happy to listen. Until next time, don't forget to always keep it toasty.